Okay, so in our last video, we finished up with slices and using them to dissect our information within the pivot tables. So now we're going to start looking at some more complicated pivot tables. Up until now, we've only really used two fields per pivot table: month and year, quarter and year, province and year, and year and revenue, which isn't very complicated. This is where the power of pivot tables comes in. You can actually use multiple fields per pivot table. This is where it sometimes gets a little bit tricky, but we'll go through it step by step and make it as easy as possible. So let's insert a pivot table. I select my data, then select Insert, and then select Pivot Table. I'm going to place it in this worksheet as well. Select Existing Worksheet, and then select a location. Then say OK. Now for this pivot table, I want to analyze year, quarter, month, and revenue. So we've selected 4 fields now to include in this pivot table. So if you have a look at the pivot table at the moment, it's got everything set as values except for month, which is set in the rows, and then it's also got values under columns. So if we look at our pivot table, it's got months over here, then it's got the sum of the year, then the sum of the quarter, and sum of revenue. So you can find those over here under values, where it says sum of year, that's over here, where it says sum of quarter, that's over here, and then sum of revenue is also over here, and the rows, which is over here. So what we want to do is I want to take year over to rows and have a look what happens. At the moment, it's summarizing month, then by year. So it's going to look at January 2016, 2017. Then it's going to look at February 2016 and 2017. Then it's going to look at March 2016 and 2017. The reason for this is for the month and year over here under rows being in this order. If I were to change it by putting year above month, see how that changes. It's now 2016, January, February, March, etc. Then it goes on to 2017, January, February, March, etc. By putting year on top, it takes precedent. So can you see now that sum of quarter is still lingering in the middle over here, which doesn't really make sense. It's kind of saying there's 4 quarters for January, 4 quarters in the year in which February occurs. Basically, it's not making much sense. So what we want to do is, if you have a think, we want to filter it by year, by month, and then also by quarter. So the most intuitive place would be is to move it over to the rows. Now see what's happened. It's going 2016, January, then the quarters, which isn't going to make much sense, and it's going to make a pretty long pivot table. What we want to do is take the quarter and put it above the month. So everything depends on the order in which these are in, always from top to bottom. So in this case, it's year, which is 2016. Then it takes the quarter, 1, and then it takes the months, January, February, March. So this is already looking like a better pivot table. What we can also do is move some information over to columns. So we could have, for instance, the year set as a column. Then it's going to start to take the same appearance as usual, where it's got the quarter, January, and then January 2016 compared with January 2017. We're quite familiar with this. Based on your data, you'll be able to manipulate rows and columns quite fluidly. The only time it gets tricky is when we look at filters and values. But we'll get to those. Now, what do we do if we want to remove something from our pivot table? Say we don't need to see the sum of revenue. You could just take it and just drop it anywhere over here in this white area. and then it'll take it away. But basically there's not going to be much to show. And we could put year back over there. If we wanted to put revenue back, we select revenue and make sure it's in the correct place. So another thing I want to show you is briefly touch on filters. The values we're going to do in a later video. So to explain filters, it's similar to a slicer. It's a way of dissecting the information within the pivot table. So for instance, if I take month and I put it into filters, it's going to take them out of the pivot table and it's going to put this over here, month, and then it's going to say all. So we can click away from the pivot table. And then what we can do is over here is basically a filter. So if you just want to see January, and then you can say OK. Now it's showing in a filtered view January in the first quarter and January in the first quarter of 2017. So if we have a look, it's going to be January in there, and then January in the Northern Cape, January in the Western Cape, nope, not that one, 2017 only, that one, and that one, and that one. Not that one. So if we have a look for 2017, the total is 678,557, and then you can see it over here, some 678,557. So it matches up. So it's basically compiling all of the Januaries from all of the quarters, quarter ones from all of the provinces. In the next video, we're going to go over a couple more pivot table tools and also work with some features and functions of pivot tables.